Um, yeah, and this is going to be a 90-minute webinar. If we need the full 90 minutes, there'll be plenty of time for questions along the way. And if we, and at the end, there'll be time specifically for questions as well. And feel free to, again, put questions in the chat. It'd be great to know a little bit about you, especially folks who haven't introduced yourselves. Feel free to put in the chat a little bit about who you are, where you're coming from, what you're working on, and anything you're looking for from this webinar. My name is Matt Feinstein. I am the Co-op Clinic Program Manager at the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. And I have been a worker owner at a co-op, a media cooperative in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I've been part of a grassroots co-op development and co-op organizing group there. And I've been on staff a little over a year at the U.S. Federation. I've been working with them in different capacities for many, many years. And the Co-op Clinic is a network of peer advisors and a program of the U.S. Federation where we do education and support co-ops with technical assistance and education work and training. And so these peer advisors come from the worker co-op experience. Like I was a worker owner in a media co-op, and then I was starting to advise others when I had the skills and experience enough to do that kind of support. So, our advisors come with the experience of having been in a co-op, but have specific areas of expertise where they support around governance and business planning, many different areas. And so after this, if you feel ready for a one-on-one meeting, you can request a consultation at usworker.coop/clinic, and you can immediately book a consultation, and we will get you resources right away. And if there's a project we can work on, we can scope that out and connect you with the right peer advisor. So again, if you're just coming in, feel free to share a little bit about who you are. I think everyone's done that. Thank you. Great. So why don't I actually kick this off with a little poll about what stage. I think I get a sense, but it'd be good to have you just fill in. Char, for the co-op that you're here representing, what stage are they at? Are they just with the idea, or are they more exploring, or is anyone here interested in the conversion process of an existing company into a co-op? So great. Okay. So
yep. So the one that I'm representing, they're in their beginning stages. So, and I'm also here just to learn as well, but they've definitely made some progress, and they're going to be filing. They've filed with the state of Minnesota and are filing as a filing for their license for a home health cooperative.
Okay, great. Well, we have a good mix here, and so just to share a little bit about co-ops in general, when we talk about co-ops, we talk about lots of different kinds of co-ops, and one way to organize co-ops is to think about how they're organized together, and who has started the cooperative. If people have come together because they want to gain access to goods and services, and they're buying together as a cooperative, we call those consumer cooperatives. You may be familiar with those with natural food stores, retail groceries. Housing cooperatives could be considered a type of consumer co-op where people come and live in the house and pay for housing together. Another way, another category would be producer co-ops, where people have come together for selling and marketing together. These are common in the agricultural sector, and they this is where, for example, Ocean Spray Cranberry, the farmers who, own the cranberry farms come together to create a product together and market it together. It's not everyone who's picking the cranberries, or in the Cabot Cheese Cooperative, it's not everyone who's milking the cows that are owners of the cooperative. It's the owners of the farms that are then the owners of the cooperatives. Whereas worker cooperatives, the people who are doing the work in the cooperative, doing the work in the business, are the worker owners. This webinar focuses on worker cooperatives, though a lot of what we talk about will be relevant to other types of cooperatives. And there are also multi-stakeholder cooperatives. These are common, where you blend two or more of these kind of constituents, where there's a retail grocery where the consumers have come up with a lot of the startup capital, and have paid a membership fee and get some dividends based on how much they shop. And then there are worker owners as well, and they get dividends based on how much they work. And that's called patronage, and we'll be getting into that. So again, focused on worker co-ops, but open to discussing multi-stakeholder if people have questions about that. And why do people start worker co-ops specifically? Well, many reasons, but usually they fall around the idea of building good work, fair pay, job security, and meeting a need in the community, right? Co-ops exist to meet a need that other businesses and organizations are not meeting, and doing it in a sustainable way where people can build, ownership, do community wealth building. And a thriving worker co-op, has all of these components, but you might emphasize one over the other as you get started. And when we talk about worker ownership, we have two components that is important to discuss. Joint ownership, right? The financial benefit, right? And then we have the democratic decision-making and democratic control. So some companies, like employee stock ownership plans, are employee owned and have the joint ownership and the financial benefit to the owners, but they don't have the democratic decision-making. Most ESOPs are not democratically organized. They have a traditional business structure. Whereas there are some nonprofits, for example, that are democratically controlled and could be worker self-directed nonprofits, or employing democratic decision-making and participatory management in those nonprofits, but they don't necessarily have the joint ownership. And so, all of these configurations are part of the broader movement, and we welcome conversations around any of these, but worker co-ops have both of these components. So when we're talking about worker cooperatives specifically, they're enterprises that are democratic and have joint ownership. Again, feel free to put any questions or suggestions or resources, anything like that, in the chat as we go, or come off mute if you have a burning question. So to give you a little sense of the landscape of worker cooperatives in the US, worker co-ops and democratic workplaces, which we do a thorough survey every few years, and we track and verify cooperatives. There's 612 verified worker co-ops in our last census, and that represents about 10,000 workers, and growing. But there are probably between 900, 1,000 more, especially if you include startups, co-ops that are in the works. So they're all over geographically, and in all sorts of industries that we'll be getting into a little bit as well. But it's definitely, it's a small movement compared to other co-op sectors or other countries' worker co-op movements, but it's growing, and it's really dedicated and connected to other social movements. The racial demographics of worker owners, is majority Black, Indigenous people of color led enterprises. There's a concentration in New York City and Bay Area of California and several other places, Philadelphia, and places where Black folks and the people of color are really leading the way. This includes immigrant communities being very involved in the co-op movement. We kind of have this perception, this kind of misinformed perception of co-ops being this very white hippie movement of the 70s, 60s and 70s. And, you know, some may have their roots there, but in actuality, there's a long history of, you know, African-American co-ops and other co-op movements led by people of color throughout the US. And it's well documented in this great book I highly recommend, Collective Courage by Jessica Gordon-Emhart. And you know, and the actual situation today is that of you know, BIPOC leadership for sure. So let's talk about the principles in general. These are internationally recognized cooperative principles, and voluntary and open membership does not mean you have to let anyone into your worker cooperative, but it does mean you have to be, when you hire someone, that there is a fair and open track for them to become an owner. So if they agree to and have and meet the qualifications that you set out from the beginning, and that those qualifications are clear and not discriminatory. So this looks like an active anti-oppression work as you do hiring and you set up your membership track and things like that. Number two, democratic member control. We talked about this a little bit. This is where worker owners are making the baseline of major decisions, such as electing the board, changing your collective agreements, your bylaws, deciding whether to close or not to close, and distribution of profits. There's lots of other involvement. You could have a collective flat structure where worker owners involved in many more decisions than that. But at the baseline, that, you know, they're involved in the governance of the cooperative, and on the basis of one worker, one vote for a worker co-op. Member economic participation, principle 3, is a key one, that people are sharing in the risk and the reward of the cooperative, right? They're patronizing with their labor, they're participating in the cooperative, and they reap the benefits if there's a good year with surplus in the form of profit sharing, which we'll go into. The principle 4, autonomy and independence. This doesn't mean you can't federate or work really closely with organizations, have really close ties with a nonprofit, even be a franchise. But it does mean you can't be a subsidiary or controlled by or owned by another entity, right? That co-ops are independent entities when it comes down to it, and they need to have their independence and autonomy. Principle 5, education and training and information. This is an active principle in co-ops, in worker co-ops, especially on the shop floor. You need to share information in an active way and have regular educational opportunities for people in order to make the democracy work. Principle 6 is such a common and important one that we often shorten it to P6. There's a P6 conference in Maine each year where all the co-ops come together. And this is the cooperation among cooperatives where people share resources and they collaborate around supply chains. I was really inspired by the movements in Argentina and it was involved in some international solidarity and work bringing up people from co-ops in Argentina, where, you know, they had taken over a tile factory that was going to be closing, and that tile factory provided the tiles for a 4-star hotel that had been taken over by the workers and run as a worker co-op. And the hotel was offering a space for national meetings of worker co-ops in these recovered factories in Argentina. And a recovered Adidas shoe factory called United Footwear Cooperative was selling their shoes in the foyer of that hotel. and collaborating on childcare for all the different co-ops in Buenos Aires. And we saw that kind of collaboration, supply chain arena, and movement building. And you'd be surprised, if you just reach out to different co-ops and co-op support organizations, how important this principle is. Concern for community includes like building the co-op because it meets a need in the community, but also how it's impacting the community around environmental justice issues, gentrification, climate justice. These are all principles that co-ops are expected to bring in and are doing in really interesting ways. And then there are additional principles that union cooperatives and co-ops affiliated with Mondragon, which is a big co-op conglomerate in based in the Basque area of Spain, but all over Europe now. And those include the sovereignty of labor, right? That unions have and collective bargaining has a place in cooperatives. The instrumental and subordinate nature of capital. That's a big mouthful, but that means capital is key to get your enterprise going and to make it successful and for it to function successfully, but it's subordinate to labor, right? The workers are what matters, and the capital has to serve that, not the other way around, which is the case in most corporations. Participation in management, wage solidarity, that people are not paid more than a certain ratio. The highest paid employees are not paid more than 5-6 times the lowest paid employees, things like that. So those are some other principles that we like to include when possible. But these 7 are the internationally recognized cooperative principles, not just worker co-op principles. What are the aims of worker co-ops? So it's really bringing this democracy to the workplace, sharing the decisions, having democratic control, the prosperity, right? Building enterprises that can really build wealth, and meeting the need of the community, and doing it in a shared way. All 3 of these areas are important. You may be stronger in one again, than others as you get going. But try to think about how this could play out in your enterprise, all 3 of these aspects. Another way to put that, people are democratically organized. They run a profitable business, a sustainable business that benefits the community. I also want to share a little bit about conversions, because this is an important place that a lot of people come to the cooperative movement through converting existing companies into a co-op. And this is a great way to start a co-op because you've already tested out you've gone through the startup phase, you've tested out that the business is worth running and maintaining. But people come to it from a few different places, right? Maybe an owner is looking for a succession plan, right? How are they gonna make sure this company can continue and get compensated for the value they've built in the company? Or they are looking to stay in the company but share the ownership and look for new investment and a new structure, or some combination. Eventually they're planning for succession and want to involve people in joint ownership and management and control to get ready for when they retire. And this process is one that is, includes some real fundamental and irreversible change, right? Going from a single owner or a partnership into a full worker cooperative. And it's messy and emergent and a natural process. And that's why we use the metaphor of, becoming a butterfly, because the result can be a beautiful one, but there's a lot of messiness that happens in the cocoon stage, but a lot of real opportunity for transformation, right? So for real change in the business, right? And this can include a real emphasis on racial equity. This can include really rethinking gender dynamics in the business. This can really shake up how you set up your management structure and how employees are really involved in broader decision making. So we're focusing on startups for this webinar, but there's a lot that's relevant to this ownership succession and conversion model. And we'd love for you all to be, spokespeople for for the co-op movement and share that this is a possibility. There's great tax incentives. People don't have to shut down their business. They can find, the employees can buy it, and they don't have, people won't have to lose their jobs. There's tax, delays that you can get, and you can maintain the culture of the business through this kind of thing. So the rest of this webinar, we're going to be thinking about the, 3 ways to kind of organize the work of starting a co-op, right? What do co-op entrepreneurs do in starting the co-op? And there's a lot of work, but we're going to help organize it in these 3 different ways: co-op capacity, internal culture and framework, business development, entrepreneurship, and co-op ecosystem development. So first, the co-op capacity. This is the internal shared vision work. Who's a member, who's not? How do you delegate the work? And how do you hold each other accountable? And we'll be going into each of these components. So the shared vision component is going from someone with an idea, or 2 people with a clear idea of the vision, and making it a broader team vision. And you can do this through group learning. In Philadelphia, they've done great book groups that get together and read books together and discuss and formulate, shared common vision and ideologies and approaches to co-op development, and then form a co-op together. Or you can just do learning on the components that you don't know so well, and really understanding your community and its, the economic or social need that you're addressing. And, as you build this team, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to meet regularly with a clear agenda and a task list and things like that. So, and then this first arena is really about clarifying, what does it mean to be a member, right? What's the expectation of each of these people? What are their rights and responsibilities? We have a whole exercise that we do with a lot of co-ops about building out your rights and responsibilities. We'll be going into that a little bit more. And then asking for real contribution of your core team members. So this first arena is really thinking about who's in as a real member, who's going to be part of this co-op, and who is just a supporter. Rights and responsibilities. So if you're thinking about financial participation, you have the right to patronize, to work, to get surplus and profit sharing based on your patronage, but you also have the responsibility to provide, the labor, to pay a fee most times, to review the budget, and losses. In times of losses, you may need to be responsible for losses. Education, of course, there's educational opportunities that co-op should provide, but you also have the responsibility to educate yourself. In terms of governance, you have the opportunity to vote for the board, to run for the board, to participate in major decisions that affect all the members. But you also have the responsibility to make sure you are participating in that engine. And it really is about building that muscle in the autogestion, right? This idea of self-management, self-governance, where you have to walk the walk and really, invest into, and balance your individual interest with the collective interest of the full co-op. Information, the rights around knowing the bylaws and the policies and the financial information, but you also have the responsibility to act in that area of transparency. All right, let's see. So this first arena, or if there's one person involved in this first arena, they're really looking out in the team dynamics, how to delegate the work, right? And it's important for the whole group to be aware of this and to not just let one person take on everything, but to really find meaningful ways for different people to plug in. And, it's not going to be familiar for everyone. Not everyone has started businesses before. Not everyone has been involved in cooperative decision-making, democratic decision-making components. And so, it's really about finding the contributions and making it real. And then setting up systems of accountability to make sure that things are moving forward. And to do this early on, even before you have a legal entity or anything, formally structured, you can structure your meetings and your tasks and the way you're moving forward in a way that works for you, but also brings accountability. And you can be building that muscle of good communication and accountability for the future co-op. So, an important way to do this is naming the tasks, writing them down, and assigning due dates for each of them, right? And then checking in each meeting or each, time you're able to look at these task lists and check in on the progress. And you celebrate when they accomplish, but if they don't get accomplished, it's really not just about shaming someone for not doing it or to say, do you want to just pass it off? But thinking about why is the person not able to follow through, right? What more information do they need? What reminders do they need? What support do they need to get there? And so really asking the why. And this person, like it's a tough role to play, but this person can really be empowered by the group to hold this accountability process and to keep it moving forward and be organized with these task lists in each of the meetings and make sure that they're reviewed. And let me give you an example. The Llama Pepper Farm came in, they were all so excited. There were 5 of them that all loved llamas and growing hot peppers. And they started this great farm. They had mixed vegetables, but they were really excited about their peppers. And so they, dove into it. They incorporated an LLC and they, did their work. And they were growing some great peppers, and the visitors to the farm loved to, check out the llamas. But they were super messy with their meetings and their systems. And they said, okay, after a year and a half, they were like, okay, wait, we need to step back and set some better systems of accountability. So what they did was they made some clear work plans, right? And job descriptions for each of them. Even though they were each doing different components, they were organized as a collective without management. But they still decided they needed some really clear, job descriptions, work plans. And then they would do peer evaluations, right? They set up a system where they would rotate in evaluating each other. And then the task list that I just mentioned, they started implementing those. They even started, with a really solid grievance process. When there was harm done or when other people's, slacking off was affecting them, they could initiate a grievance process, even a suspension process, and even a process for removal. They also instituted some mentorship because they were bringing on some new people, and they wanted to make sure that there was a clear way for those people to become full participants as soon as possible. So they set up all those systems. It was a fair amount of work, but it totally paid off. They grew even better peppers. They had more llamas to spit on their visitors, and it was a much more effective co-op. So that's the first arena, right? Building this internal team, thinking about accountability, delegating work, clarifying the membership component. The second component is the business development. This is what the co-op needs to make you financially viable. How do you create value? What's the legal form? How do you raise the sufficient capital? And what's your management structure going to look like? We'll go into each of those components. So creating value for someone else, right? I know there are people here with small business development experience. You've started businesses before, you know how key this is. Even with, a lot of us come with mission-based ideas, and we have this intrinsic, knowledge that the community needs this. Okay, but you also need to get feedback of how they want to receive it, how your product is really meeting the needs and creating value, right? So you have to really be clear on who are the customers the client's going to be, what is the key problem that they're facing, and then what is the current solution that may or may not be fitting their needs so well, and what is your co-op going to do that provides the better solution, right? This is standard small business development work, but it is so key for co-ops to also employ this work so that you can be financially viable and that you can have the right revenue and cash flow needed to run your co-op successfully. So there's lots of small business tools out there. around lean startup models, right? Where you build a product, you get feedback on it, you test it out, you pivot, and then you put it back out there for more testing. Um, but there are also some co-op specific resources that use this kind of lean co-op arena. There's an ownership model canvas. So there's the business model canvas that many of you may be aware of, where you think about the different sectors and the value that you're bringing and your unique value proposition, and how all the different suppliers and customers and how those all relate together in a visual way. And that's an important tool that can be great for co-op startups. But there's also some unique components to co-ops. So there's an adapted tool that start.coop has there around ownership ownership model canvas. And but this really is about thinking about how you're generating consistent, sustainable revenue. And the other thing we see with startups a lot is they're trying to be everything for everyone, right? And they're doing an educational program while they're building their value-added farm product, and they're doing they're trying to expand their farming production, and that's great that there can, especially since you have a team in a co-op to do a lot of this work. But if you can do one product and do it really well and grow from there, we've seen many more startups be successful that way. Again, feel free to put any comments or thoughts in the chat. I know a lot of you have experience with small businesses, so feel free to share your favorite tools or things like that. Okay, so to go over the startup process, right? Wouldn't it be great if it were this linear process that we might think it will be, right? You come up with your idea, you build your team, you develop your business plan, then you finalize your governance and policy documents, you form your legal entity, and you're in operation. Boom, it's so nice and linear. The reality is much more messy, iterative. It can be, there's great things about the iterative process, right? You build part of your team and part of your business plan, and then you grow it and come back and improve things. You're in partial operation as you're developing your full marketing plan. And then you form your legal entity because you had this great fiscal sponsor, for a while, and then you raise the rest of the capital you need. You finish your policy documents, so there's a lot of different things going on at once. And that's okay. But know that, it's not going to be as linear as the previous slide. The second arena will be thinking about legal entity as well. And we really suggest you answer some basic questions. There's a document called the 28 questions to ask before talking to your lawyer that you can find online. That's a great tool. But basically, you should be discussing with your group, how do people become members? What does membership really mean? We just have worker member owners, and they need to, work with us for a certain amount of time, and they need to pay this fee, those kind of decisions, some basic things like that. How are you going to make decisions? Are you going to operate by consensus or modified consensus, where you strive for consensus but fall back to a vote? And in your bylaws, do you have really clear, are you starting to build like these kind of decisions we want everyone to be involved in? And we suggest, for example, to have pretty high bars on things like involving new members, right? But then some lower bars on removing members, so you don't get yourself stuck in a situation, but a fair one, a fair process for removal. So, what's the cost to join? How will profits be divided? And I'll show you the way that a lot of co-ops deal with profits. Do you need outside investors is a key one. Do you need to treat your worker owners as owners and for tax purposes and other legal purposes? Are you okay with everyone being an employee and being treated as an employee for tax purposes? These are key things you want to talk about before you sit down with a lawyer. And when you sit down with a lawyer, it's great to have other co-op savvy people with you so that the lawyers aren't just, pushing you in what they're most familiar with. Maybe they understand LLCs better, so they're going to push you in the LLC route. The LLC route is great for many co-ops because it's such a flexible entity type. It's a limited liability company. It's a contract-based one. Whatever your operating agreement says is what goes. So, and they're in every state. So you don't feel limited if your state doesn't have a great co-op, worker co-op statute, and you want to be a worker co-op. You could incorporate another state, but if you're doing all your business in one state, that's probably cumbersome. So you could use the LLC statute, or you could use a C corporation statute, or you could use an agricultural cooperative corporation statute. So and lawyers can help you figure this out. Co-op developers can help you answer some initial questions. There's great benefits of using the worker cooperative corporation statutes because it's baked into what you do, right? Someone can't then take that entity and make it into just a partnership that's benefiting two people in the future. And the tax flow is laid out in the statute itself. There are some new limited cooperative associations in some states that allow for investor class ownership if you need to raise a lot of capital. So if you can answer a lot of these questions and then go to a co-op savvy lawyer, we can help you connect with a co-op savvy lawyer in almost every region. Then you can really find the right entity and start working on the right policy documents that will fulfill that entity. So that's a whole bunch. Yeah. Raise venture capital. Yes. Okay. So raising capital is a key one. We'll be getting to that in a little bit, but I'll tackle it right now. So yeah, it's not like an angel investor type relationship with investors. They're not going to be there. It's rare that an investor is going to be just an investor and not a worker owner, and that they're going to take an ownership stake in the company in a way that they're going to get voting shares, right? In a lot of companies that deal with venture capital, you sell components, shares of your company in a way that they get a controlling, component of it. In worker co-ops, it's not that way. You're looking for investors that understand the autonomy needed for a cooperative, and there have been some really successful capital raises with that kind of investment. Maybe there's shares sold, maybe there's a real ownership stake, and they have very limited, decision making, but it's not a full vote like a worker owner has. And there are other, ways of raising capital using direct public offerings, where you're, not limiting it to accredited investors, where smaller investors can pitch in $1,000, $2,000 into your capital raise. There's the other thing about raising capital is that there are some great co-op friendly lenders out there that do some equity like investing, that do loans that are custom fit for cooperatives. They're not going to ask you for personal guarantees. They're not going to ask you to put up your house as collateral. They may ask you to put up some of the farm equipment you buy with the loan as collateral. But not every lender actually, looks for collateral from these co-op community development financial institutions, right? And these are set up that, any interest that they're charging on it goes back into the co-op movement. So that's a great place to start. If you're looking for capital, talk to one of these co-op lenders like sharedcapital.coop. Or if you're in the Northeast, the Cooperative Fund in the Northeast, coopfund.coop, or in many cities, there are seed commons. I think it's seedcommons.org. There are seed commons locally, run cooperative lending organizations too. The Working World is kind of backbone of a lot of that effort. So there's some exciting stuff happening in the cooperative arena. National Cooperative Bank, of course, funds cooperatives for larger, raises. But it's not exactly, yes, crowdfunding. Definitely, crowdfunding can be used. but it's not the same relationship with like an angel investor that's looking for an equity share in a company. But there's a lot of patient, capital out there. There's a lot of angel type investors that are willing to say, hey, we just really believe in what you're doing and we're going to invest. And yes, we want a return as long as you can do it without bankrupting your co-op. That's what you usually do is you set a 3% return or something on those investments, but you have a clause that if you can't pay it, then it's deferred, things like that. But if you're getting any outside investment and promising a return, it's very important to look at securities laws, and those are state by state, and definitely talk to a lawyer if you're considering any of that. Even a substantial membership fee sometimes could be considered a security. So look into that. Great, thanks for that question. So how does money flow through a cooperative? There's lots of ways of doing it, but this is the most common way to avoid double taxation, to not be taxed twice on one portion of surplus or profit that comes through. So there's a surplus, it's called, anything that's generated by members, right? So people that are member owners generate a portion of your net, your net income, and then anything that's generated by non-members, say you have employees that are not yet members or something like that, that is considered profit and goes into the collective account. But if you have any that are, the portion that's created by the members, this is just a calculation of hours worked throughout the year. You have a first choice point of how much of that should go into your collective account, also called your retained earnings account. And that's taxed at the corporate level, and that can be used however the co-op decides. And how much is going to go out to the members based on the hours worked, right? And that's called member patronage. So maybe you split it 50-50 for the first few years. Maybe the first few years you don't have any profit, but when you have some, maybe you split it 50-50. The second choice point you have is how much you're going to pay out in cash that year. People pay individual tax on that, remember, so at least 20% goes out in cash so they can cover their taxes. But then some can go into what are called individual capital accounts or internal capital accounts. And this is done through written notices of allocation, meaning basically this money is yours. We're going to keep it in the co-op because we need the capital to reinvest, but it's yours. And when you take it out, when you leave or when the co-op is able to pay those out and wants to pay down these capital accounts, that's yours and it's tax-free because you already paid taxes on it if you use these written notices of allocation. And that can accumulate over the years, right? Maybe you have your initial pay, fee that is refundable, could be refundable or not, but let's say it is. So that's the base of what's in your capital account, and then you've gotten maybe you made an initial capital contribution as well to get it started, right? So that's in the bottom of your piggy bank here, and then maybe you had a good year and got a written notice of allocation, and you got your internal capital account goes up, and then the next year it goes up as well. Then you have a loss; it might go down a little bit, but it's positive when you leave, and you get to take that money out. So that's a common way to do it. So any money that is generated is taxed either at the individual or the corporate level, not at both. It's you don't have to know all the details of this. Just know that this works. This is called, usually used under subchapter T of the IRS, which is the co-op subchapter, which both LLCs can be eligible for if they're taxed as corporations, or C corporations or cooperative corporations. Cooperative corporations are set up to do it this way. We talked about this, startup capital. Lenders, it's great to be in touch with lenders early on because they can look at your financials, and give you feedback, and they're used to working with co-ops that are just putting together their financials, right? The non-voting investor equity we talked about, and then just common sense not to let one member charge it all on their credit card, right? And then this second arena will be thinking about your governance and management structures too. So this is one structure where you have all your members here together that elect a board, and the board, and they're empowering that board to really represent them and make decisions, strategy decisions, and policy decisions. And the board oversees the management that is then in charge of workers, to saying, make sure do your jobs right, and overseeing and supporting and the workers, right? This is and it's cyclical, because then the members can elect a different board representative the next year that will oversee the management differently. So that's one way to do it, but there's lots of other ways, and there you can get creative, right? Non-traditional structures where maybe all the members are also board members, and they organize most of the work in committees, right? Or team-based processes. A fair amount of co-ops use sociocracy and holocracy, which are circle-based, consent-based governance and decision-making processes, where basically you empower a team to do a lot of the work, and you just figure out where are the overlaps in the team. Do you have a general circle that acts like a board to make the connections between these circles? And it's also called dynamic governance, right? Because there's a lot of shifting in where things happen. And there's even a conference coming up, Sociocracy for All. .org has a lot of information on that, and they have a whole section on co-op resources. So, but again, it can be whatever. You can have a traditional management structure and just have a real democratic component on the governance side. Governance decisions, this is key too for the early stages, is to really separate what is governance, what are policies that will be long-term, and what is operations, right? What are things that are related to more of the day-to-day work? Who are you getting your supplies from? Where, how are you interacting with your customers? Your marketing strategy, your office, and all that is operations. Governance are bylaws and long-lasting policy documents, and yearly budgets and strategic plans, and electing your board and things like that are longer term components. And to separate, even if you're having your meetings together and having all these components, to try to separate out the agendas. Ideally, you have separate meetings and you give separate notice for governance meetings. But if they're together, then maybe you could separate out the agenda so they're not all intertwined and get confused. All right, so this second arena, again, creating value, legal entity, startup capital, governance, and management. Start thinking about where you may be strong in your team and where you're going to need some help. The third arena is about building the ecosystem, right? And connecting to the ecosystem. And this is about thinking about where you're getting your technical assistance, how are you connecting with social movements, how are you getting customer involvement and commitments, and maybe government involvement. Technical assistance you can get from a whole variety of places, right? Co-op developers are really great on the democratic processes. They can get those initial governance questions going before you talk to a lawyer and reduce your lawyer bill, which is great. And then I'd say 70% of what it is to start a co-op is what it is to start a small business. So getting your financial projections, your feasibility study, your business plan together, all those components aren't too different from as a co-op as a small business. So getting support from small business development centers or universities with business offices, business departments that can support you, or Center for Women in Enterprise, or other groups like that that can support you in your small business development. And then where it's co-op specific, you get the co-op developer involved. Co-op developers often have a whole suite of resources to do their business development too. If you have the funding or they have the funding to support you. And we can connect you to co-op developers, lawyers, bookkeepers, co-op savvy accountants. So reach out to the Co-op Clinic if you need connections to any of those. This third arena is also thinking about connecting to social movements. Co-ops are most always mission-based enterprises. So you can be a catalyst for change around that mission. You can connect to other people in the movements who are working for similar change. And you know, this often we see founders really strong on this, right? And your founding team, because you've come together, because you share this passion, share this vision. And then sometimes it gets diluted. You haven't worked it into your hiring processes or your major policy documents enough, or the culture of your co-op enough, so that it gets diluted and that connection to the movement that you started off with isn't as strong, you know, 5-10 years down the line. So thinking about, you know, what does that look like? We have a mini guide about building your team that has some tools about building the team you want, thinking about incorporating that in different places into your hiring and onboarding processes. But then if you're promising something to the broader movement, it's important to live up to that and really follow through on it, not just become a business that's struggling to maintain and is no longer contributing. There's some great, you know, examples. There's so many, but Cooperation Jackson is one that's been, you know, based in Black liberation movements in the South. They're in Jackson, Mississippi, where they've organized a network of co-ops that's building on, you know, Black organizing there. New Era Windows took over a windows and door factory that was going to close, and with their union, right? So really this worker justice component, and they're continuing to contribute, you know, in that labor organizing arena. Design Action Collective does a lot of the artwork on sliding scale basis for a lot of movements. Black Lives Matters movements and others have been, you know, supported by that design co-op that's been going 30 plus years. At the US Federation of Worker Co-op, we have member councils to support this connection to movements, right? We have the Racial and Economic Justice Council. So if you join the US Federation, you can get plugged into these councils. We have Movimiento de Inmigrantes en Cooperativas for immigrant co-ops that are engaged in those broader struggles. And Policy and Advocacy Council to create better policies locally, regionally, on your municipality, statewide, and nationally that benefit, you know, co-op development and worker ownership broadly. So there's lots of great things going on around policy. We have a council on union co-ops too. A lot of people think, okay, well, if it's worker owned and governed and managed and everything, why do you need a union as well? There's a lot of benefits to co-ops to think about union involvement. Unions, first of all, have resources, right? And experience and governance and in worker benefits. And some unions have put actual money into the development of co-ops. So think of if there's a union that you can collaborate with. There's also another layer of worker protection, especially if your co-op is going to scale. There are different stratifications that happen in any, you know, organization, and a union can be a way to protect the folks with the least power in that co-op as it grows. And then you have the collective power and the broader, you know, industry impact, right? So the Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx is a large worker co-op with over 2,000 workers, and they have an impact on their whole industry, the home care industry, right? Through their involvement with SEIU. And they have the organizing power, the political connections to move things advocacy-wise that they need to. So we have a council that meets regularly. If you want to plug into that, you can join a call. You can get a lot of info at unioncoops.org. Consider affiliating with a co-op from the beginning or later on with a union. And then getting commitments from commitments and input from customers, right? So this is about thinking about surveys, polls, forums, social media engagement. How do you really engage with the customers to know that what you're offering is something that they need and getting traction? Or if you have a few products you're trying out and want to see which one has most traction, this third arena is really doing that early engagement work. They also might be doing some pre-sales, the crowdfunding that someone mentioned here could be a way to do that, right? To see what traction there is. And they also might be thinking about engaging anchor institutions, hospitals, universities, Federation of Faith-based organizations that have in their mission often to support the local community. And some of that can be done through local purchasing, right? You can go to the institution and say, hey, we want to start this green laundry business. You do a lot of laundry and we can provide, help us build this business or help us, grow. We're already doing great work, and you can get those contracts. That's been done in Cleveland, a little differently than the way I said, but and elsewhere, Springfield, Massachusetts, lots of different places have done this anchor institution approach too to help grow the co-ops. Then you might see how you align with government goals, right? You could become a preferred vendor for your city or state. You could think about getting some workforce development funds, because the deliverables for those grants, maybe you partner with a nonprofit to do that. Maybe you go for it yourself, especially if you're creating a lot of jobs. That's the deliverable, right? Creating good jobs. And so you're not having to do, a lot of other additional education work and things that's not part of your core business operation. You're creating jobs. So workforce development grants and initiatives are great. Maybe there's geographic incentives for businesses starting in a neighborhood you're looking, that you're based in. So check in with, especially, city or municipal governments around that. So those are the three areas. For those who have to go early, we'll be sending the recording out for the rest. We'll be sending out the slideshow and a bunch of resources soon. So thanks for joining us. These three areas are a good way to organize it. You can do other ways of organizing it too, but maybe you're thinking about a team of 3 or 6 people, and 1 or 2 people will be, each in charge of one of these areas. As you build that initial team, remember to really build in equity components, right? Are you representing who, your base is, who you're aspiring to be? Our media cooperative, for example, was, very racially diverse, but our gender dynamics weren't great. We were mostly cis guys, and then working on gender dynamics later down the road was much harder than if we had, had that gender parity early on. So think about that very early as you build your team too. And the many different identities that, are important to have represented. So again, the first area, co-op capacity, business development, ecosystem development. People have different strengths. People might need to go find resources and educate yourselves on areas of weaknesses. One person might love group process and take the first arena. One person might love spreadsheets and take the business development component. And one person is that networker and mobilizing allies and takes the ecosystem stuff. So we offer this as one way to get yourself organized. Feel free to tweak it and let us know if you have great suggestions of improvements. And start thinking about your questions, because we're coming up on the question arena. Start popping them in the chat or thinking about them. Let me share a little bit more about the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. We are the grassroots entity that represents and organizes with worker co-ops and democratic workplaces in the US. So we do policy work, we offer technical assistance, we offer health-related benefits if you need dental and vision plans and things like that. It's hard to get those as small businesses, affordable ones. So come get involved and we can help you get access to those. We have plans for our members. We also have these peer networks and member councils, so we can connect you to other people in your industries. We have a great active tech co-op meetup, that has a regular Zoom call and active email list where they share resources and support each other. We have worker co-op farms. We have lots of different industries that connect to each other through our federation. There's a bookstore one that's getting active. Let's see, there was also coffee shops. Yes, there are lots of coffee shops involved in our movement, so we can help you connect to those other coffee shops and they can share their experiences. And we have we have lots of events, these webinars, but we also have a national conference we're organizing for September, some in-person and some online components this fall. We have training and resources, and again, discounted technical assistance if you join. So consider joining. You can join as a startup member. That's just a flat $250 a year and there's work trade options too. And you get access to all this stuff. You just don't have a vote until you're a full formed worker co-op, and then you get to vote for our board, and we're a membership-based organization. Again, policy and advocacy council is a great way to plug in if you're interested in policy work. We have member partners all over the country, many more stars than are represented here. We have a service provider directory on the website where you can find co-op developers, bookkeepers, accountants, lawyers, things like that are members of our federation. That you can find them through that as well, or connect with us. There's some great online resources, and Democracy at Work Institute has been building these for many years and has a great resource library at institute.coop. The Sustainable Economies Law Center has great legal resources on co-ops. They have a whole set at cooplaw.org or at their own website, theselc.org. And then we have a bunch on our website too at usworker.coop. We've been developing, and you can come to us for technical assistance, right? If it's governance, setting up your books, business planning, training your board. If for established co-ops, we have ongoing stuff. So let us know, we'll find the right advisors. And then we're building these free guides. We have a bunch of them already online at usworker.coop/clinic/startups. And there's one on onboarding and building your team, like I mentioned. There's one on democratic workplace and accountability and conflict. Conflict is a key issue, not just in co-ops, but in businesses in general. But there's some co-op specific suggestions on how to deal with conflict. Funding for technical assistance. Maybe you have all these ideas and you want all the support in so many arenas, but you don't have the funding for it. Well, there's resources in that mini guide. And there's a mini guide on financing in general, right? Who are those different co-op lenders I mentioned, and what should you think about? How does crowdfunding play into it? Then there's some tools on setting your membership fees, trial periods, and setting up your structure and decision making, right? So, we're almost done with one on founders compensation and sweat equity, and one on boards. So those will be out soon. Check back soon. We have a grant to support co-ops, and many, there are co-op development centers all over the country that also have this rural cooperative development grant that can provide this technical assistance for free. So if you're in a rural area, reach out to us, or we can point you to the right co-op development center that can provide that support for free. So again, our co-op clinic, you request the support when you're ready, when you have a team and you're past the idea phase, you're like ready to go, and you have some idea of what kind of assistance you need. Give us, fill out the form at this website, and click the get support. Then you set up a 30-minute call. Fill out a quick form. You get our calendar. You set up a call. You get a personalized resources. We send whatever you need right away to you. And if you're ready for a project, we send you a scope, right? And we go back and forth until that scope looks good. And then we match you with the right peer advisor. And then if there's no grants to support it, then we'll bill you. And if you join as a member, it's 85 an hour. Non-members are 125 an hour. We're working on a sliding scale component too. And yeah, that's basically how it works. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. We have some upcoming events. We have a webinar this coming Wednesday, May 11th at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on leadership succession. We have a panelist from Argentina and a longtime successful worker co-op grocery and another great co-op leader talking about leadership, right? How do you really build active leadership development? We have one on financial literacy, one on open bookkeeping, and those two are in June. And we have a bunch of other events coming up you can check out at usworker.coop/calendar. So that's what I have to share for you today. If you like this, you can join as a monthly sustainer or pitch in at usworker.coop. I would love to hear any questions. Feel free to come off mute and ask your question, put them in the chat. There's other areas I could go into too, if there aren't any immediate questions. Is there an incentive structure for existing unions to support a co-op? There's not necessarily an incentive structure, though, you know, as we talk about the decline of the labor movement, some unions have taken it on as this is an area where we won't have to go out and pound the pavement. There's a group of workers ready to organize, right? And there's a lot of energy around it. So it's, you know, potentially really mutually beneficial to the unions to bring, you know, additional energy into unions. There are a bunch of unions that have interest at the national level. There are a bunch of locals that have some interest, and the Union Co-ops Council can hopefully connect you to it. I don't know about the hotel workers union. I haven't run across any overlap there, but maybe there is. So check in. Definitely around farming and food, UFCW in a few areas have been involved. Like I mentioned, SEIU is involved in one of the largest worker co-ops in the US. And then the United Steelworkers has partnered with Mondragon, the big co-op in Spain, to do work in the US. And they've supported union co-op initiatives in Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio, and LA and elsewhere. Here in Worcester, Massachusetts, there's a union co-op print shop called Works that is affiliated with the Steelworkers. So you don't have to be like a steelworker to, you know, there's a broader union membership for sure in United Steelworkers. But yeah, there's lots of different co-ops who have been, Unite here is engaged. Lots of different unions having been involved in different ways. But yeah, and we just came out with a toolkit that's on unioncoops.org that is a good starting place for unions that say that, you know, this is why you'd want to work with a co-op. So that's a good place to start. Any other questions? We got plenty of time. There's often a lot, yeah, okay, liquidity options for co-ops as they retire or want to leave. Yeah, this co-ops do it in different ways. Those internal capital accounts I mentioned, some co-ops, especially like build and design co-ops with pretty high margins, tend to see quite a bit of profit distribution. And they've often used those kind of as retirement accounts or in addition to retirement accounts. And then that's like an issue, right, around liquidity, like you're mentioning. If a bunch of people want to leave and take their capital out, how do you do that? So then you have to plan ahead and make sure that there's regular payouts. You're not in a place, and usually there's a certain period of time that you put in your policy documents that say, you know, you have a year to pay it out, or 2 or 3 years, and if it's longer than a certain period of time, maybe you're paying some interest on it. So you're not bankrupting the co-op. but yeah, and it's just great to have financial advisors involved that understand co-ops to help you plan ahead for that kind of retirement and those kind of issues. And some of the long-term co-ops would probably be happy to talk to you about that. So we could always put you in touch with folks. Are there other liquidity issues that you were thinking that didn't get to, or any other questions around that?
What about, I guess, like, maybe if they're, I mean, yeah, their really only option is to sell it back to the business, right? To sell it to the co-op, like your ownership stake.
Yeah, right. So you don't, right. You can't sell your share to someone else. You share it back to the co-op, and the co-op, gets another member to invest in the co-op. And a co-op could raise gradually the pay-in. At least should be, maybe increasing it for cost of living kind of increases, but you can't do it in a discriminatory way. You can't do it in a sudden way that's preventative for new members to ever be able to be involved. But you can raise it enough to make sure that you have the liquidity for people to exit, as you go. That's a key consideration. Some of the larger engineering co-ops, for example, have pretty hefty buy-ins, but the buy-in could be pretty high. It could be $5,000, $8,000, $10,000, but you can have ways of paying it over time, right? You can do wage deductions. You can get member loans, member share loans. Some of these lenders get co-ops so much that they understand that a member might need to take out a loan to have the full buy-in. So you can get creative. Yeah, there's lots of different ways to do that.
Like, what if a member, like, they're on their path to ownership, they have certain ownership equity that they've like earned, but then they like quit, like they have to sell that back, right?
Well, yeah, their share definitely has to be returned to the co-op. If you can decide, some co-ops have $200 member fees, and they've decided those are non-refundable, for example. So if they've paid their 180 of the 200, it's not the end of the world. They realize that they're told ahead of time that it's non-refundable. If it is most common and sort of a best practice for it to be a larger investment, a really considerable investment, and that it is refundable. It's capital you're putting in. You're sharing the risk and reward again. So if they've paid off 1,800 of a $2,000 payment, then the co-op has a certain amount of time to pay them back as they either leave or are kicked out of the co-op. Yeah, that's not like you can sell it to your cousin, or there's maybe a few areas where an estate would hold it for a limited period of time. But
And then last question on this related topic, what about like if anyone gets fired?
Yeah, so they're fired. They are owed any capital in their internal capital account. That might be their membership fee, any additional capital they paid in,
Okay.
and any profit sharing. So they're owed that usually within a year or 2 years or 3 years of them being fired or leaving. They're owed that capital back. So that's a consideration. It incentivizes longevity and working it out, and but you want to make sure like you're saying, the liquidity issues, you want to make sure you have enough in your reserves to be able to remove someone who's problematic.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question, but it might be too complicated for this. But I'm just curious, for my co-op, we're hoping to do a fundraising event soon, using a fiscal sponsor. We're not incorporated yet. And we want to sell member shares, consumer shares. We want to be multi-stakeholder, kind of just as a fundraising strategy, and to get people on an email list and to get people excited and then convert those to actual shares later. And I'm now, after doing this, I'm like concerned that we'll be breaking securities law by doing that.
I would check.
Yeah.
I don't know the details enough. I don't know, the state laws specifically. Yeah, I would check to make sure you're not, but there are a lot of exemptions to counting those type of investments as securities for the purposes of co-ops or small business or crowdfunding. So, it shouldn't be too hard to find a tried and true route for that, and to set up a process to do just what you're saying so that you can get some early buy-in, right? Co-ops do that all the time. They get this early buy-in, this membership drive. Consumer co-ops do it a lot, right? To get a membership drive for years before they actually open their doors.
Okay, yeah.
It's
So
definitely
maybe
risky.
we'll actually look at consumer co-ops instead of the worker co-op field.
Well, worker co-ops have done it too. So yeah, ideally talk to a lawyer who's done it, for either or both.
Yeah.
And yeah, or to a co-op who's done it and they can share their processes with you. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
We often get a lot of questions around nonprofits and relationships to nonprofits. Is that of interest to any of you? Some groups, because we're often coming with such mission-based work, our grant's going to be part of the picture, right? Or tax deductible donations. And if you want your full independence and autonomy and want to have the worker ownership component, you can't be a nonprofit yourself. Maybe you want to be a worker self-directed nonprofit, and just have the democratic component. But if you want all that independence, what co-ops often do is find a fiscal sponsorship relationship with a nonprofit that really gets them, that can support them. Maybe they take 5%, for administrative fees, maybe 10%, but at least they're able, they get the support from the nonprofit. They have a clear MOU between the two organizations, and they can get access to grants for the educational work they do, for the training they need to do to get their co-op going, to get the technical assistance they need to start. So, and even, some of the operations of co-ops in itself could be considered charitable or tax exempt or, grant funded type work. So there's a lot of caveats and cautions of, getting too intertwined, and then the separation is difficult, but there's a lot of great examples of that. Any other questions or things people want to share? The team building process is where a lot of people are at, that participate here, and thinking about how do you meet other people that share your interest and fill in, the gaps of what you still need on your team. And even though you're in pre-operations and you're in early startup phase, you can think about sweat equity, right? There's ways of compensating folks later on, but there's also, important ways to do like almost a job interview, even though it's not a job yet, even they're not going to be compensated right away, but making sure that they have the skills you need, that there's a good fit, that you have compatible culture and a vision that maybe not the same, but that can be melded together. In our worker co-op, the media cooperative, I was really into documentary filmmaking. I met two other people. One was really into community audio projects, and another one was very into youth training. And we came together, and a fourth person was interested in other creative, work for grassroots organizations. So we came together, and it took over a year for us to like go through a co-op class and to share our visions and to really meld that together into the co-op. But it was worthwhile. The ending result of that vision was definitely stronger. So any other questions? Or
Where did you meet them?
I met them through community-based organizations that were doing environmental justice organizing. And I don't know if that's you know, other groups hold, interest meeting events and get supporters and potential new members, or they hit the social media networks pretty hard to find folks. Or some of the events we put on are good places to find co-op oriented folks that might have similar interests too. Like I said, we're doing a conference in September. I'm trying to think of other good ways people have built their teams and found those folks. I don't know, sometimes just reaching out to people who are in companies doing similar work, but might be, might have the right skills, but are jaded by the super hierarchical and disinterested corporate structure, all right, any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, does anyone have suggestions on that team building component or finding other folks? People often ask, what is a good size team to start? And co-ops have definitely been started by one person. You got a lot of the structures in place and then you build it up. It's generally a best practice to have 3 or more in your founding team. And usually this, the informal steering committee is what creates your founding board in a co-op. So to think intentionally about that, the size of that founding team is good. 3, 5, kind of a best practice is like 5 to 7, though. So anywhere between 3 and 15 has been found to work really well. But if there's 2 of you and you're really dedicated, but want to be intentional and make sure that you're, paying really good wages and able to do benefits, that's not out of the question. Some co-op lenders may require 3. So 3+ is generally the rule of thumb, and for boards, there's like a 5 to 9 window that's been shown to be really effective, but plenty of boards are 11, 13, 15. All right, well, we will send more resources soon. And if you have any other questions, feel free to, get in touch. I just put my email here in the chat, and we will send out these resources, and feel free to, book a 30-minute consultation intake with us if interested.
Thank you, Matt.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.
All right, take
Thank
care.
you.